You open your eyes. The room is quiet the way it always is. You reach for your phone out of habit, and that's the first moment something feels wrong. No notifications. Not one. You walk to the window and the street below is empty. No cars, no people, no sound. Somewhere deep in your brain, a system that has been running since before you could speak just switched on, and it's about to change how your entire day feels. Here's the reframe. You probably think the scariest part of waking up to an empty world would be the silence, or the mystery of where everyone went. It's not. The scariest part is what your own brain does to you in the first 60 seconds, before you've even stepped outside. And understanding that reaction tells you something about why you feel lonely on an ordinary Tuesday night, even when nobody has disappeared at all. Let's start with the biology, because your reaction to this scenario isn't random, it's ancient. Humans evolved as an intensely social species. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, known for his research on the cognitive limits of social relationships, has argued that human brains grew as large as they did specifically to manage complex social bonds, tracking who owes who a favor, who's trustworthy, who's a threat. Your brain isn't just built to enjoy company. It's built to expect it constantly, the same way your lungs are built to expect air. Waking up to true isolation wouldn't just feel sad. It would trigger something closer to a physical alarm. Psychologists have studied this exact reaction in extreme isolation settings, from solitary confinement to polar expedition researchers spending months without human contact. Researcher Craig Haney, who has extensively studied the psychological effects of prolonged isolation, found that extended solitude can produce anxiety, hallucinations, and a breakdown in your basic sense of reality, not within months, but within days. Your mind doesn't experience isolation as peace and quiet. It experiences isolation as a 5-alarm fire, because for nearly all of human history, being alone meant being unprotected, and unprotected meant probably dead. So picture the scenario fully. You've confirmed the street is empty. You walk to a neighbor's house, knock, nothing. You turn on the television and it's just static or a frozen last frame. Your phone has full signal bars but connects to nothing. By hour 3, you're not just confused, you're in a heightened state most people only experience during genuine emergencies: elevated heart rate, restless packing, an intrusive need to keep checking places you've already checked. This isn't weakness. It's your nervous system running the oldest program it has. Something is deeply wrong, find your group. Here's the counterintuitive twist, the part almost nobody expects. After the initial panic fades, and assuming your basic needs like food, water, and shelter are met, many people would eventually settle into something less like terror and more like a strange, hollow calm. Researchers studying long-duration isolation, including scientists who have spent extended time in Antarctic research stations, have documented this pattern repeatedly. The mind adapts. It has to. Psychologist Suedfeld, who has spent decades researching extreme and unusual environments including polar isolation, found that after the acute crisis phase passes, many people report entering a strangely stable, almost meditative state. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of adjusted equilibrium. Your brain, unable to sustain 5-alarm fire mode indefinitely, eventually recalibrates what normal means. That's not a flaw in your psychology. It's one of its most important features. But here's where the video stops being about a thought experiment and becomes a mirror. That recalibration process, adjusting your baseline for what feels normal, isn't something that only happens in extreme isolation. It's happening in your life right now, quietly, constantly. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation, the well-documented tendency for humans to return to a relatively stable baseline of well-being after both positive and negative life changes. It's why a raise that felt thrilling for a month eventually feels ordinary. It's the same mechanism that would eventually let you adjust to an empty world. Your brain isn't built to sustain any intense state, good or bad, forever. It's built to normalize whatever your reality currently is. Now consider the specific texture of loneliness this scenario reveals, because it's more precise than you might think. Social psychologists distinguish between two different kinds of loneliness. Emotional loneliness, the absence of one deep, close attachment, and social loneliness, the absence of a broader network or community around you. Waking up with everyone gone would hit you with both simultaneously, at maximum intensity, which is part of why the scenario feels so uniquely unbearable in the imagination. But here's the twist. Research on loneliness, notably by psychologist John Cacioppo, who spent much of his career studying the neuroscience of social isolation, found that chronic loneliness in ordinary life, the kind millions of people experience while surrounded by other humans, activates strikingly similar stress responses in the body as physical isolation does. Being in a crowded room doesn't automatically protect you from the exact alarm system this scenario would trigger. Real disconnection can quietly activate the same biological wiring. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. You don't need everyone to vanish to trigger a version of this feeling. Scrolling through a phone full of people you rarely talk to, sitting in a full office where no one really knows you, going days where every interaction is transactional rather than genuine. These can activate a diluted version of the exact isolation response your brain would unleash in full if you woke up completely alone. The emptiness in this thought experiment isn't hypothetical. For a significant number of people, it's a background hum they're already living with, just distributed in smaller doses across an otherwise crowded life. So bring it back to right now, to your actual day. The people around you, the coworker whose name you never bothered to learn, the friend you've been meaning to text back for 3 weeks, the family member you talk to once a year out of obligation. These aren't just background noise in your life. Based on everything psychologists understand about isolation and connection, they're functioning as a kind of psychological infrastructure, quietly keeping the alarm system in your brain switched off. You don't notice infrastructure until it's gone. Nobody thinks about plumbing until the water stops running. So what if you woke up and everyone else had disappeared? You'd panic first, exactly the way your evolutionary programming demands. Then, if you survived long enough, you'd adapt, because adaptation is one of the strangest and most reliable things your mind does. But the version of you reading this right now already knows the ending to this story a little differently than the thought experiment suggests, because you haven't lost everyone. Not yet. Which means the actual question was never really, what if everyone disappeared? It's how much of your infrastructure are you quietly letting disappear anyway? One unanswered text, one skipped call, one unspoken thank you at a time. The world isn't empty, but some part of you might be running the isolation alarm regardless, and now you know exactly why.